Chapter 1 The Road to the World Championship. An isolated childhood. Since the second grade, when we moved from Aomori down to Tokyo, I was always sensitive about being excluded. My new classmates were a bit standoffish. When they did talk to me, for some reason, I never felt like they were truly opening up. So I was left wondering what everyone really thought about me. It was like there was this invisible wall surrounding me, a barrier that kept me alone in the crowd. We would goof around together, but I don't think I had any true friends at school. My sense of isolation kept me from ever bonding with anyone. I felt like there was something different about me. When I woke up in the morning during school, after returning home, I always felt detached. I was always irritated with something, and my childhood was dismal. My sister is 7 years older than me and was born in Tokyo. When she was 4, we moved to Aomori, where I was born 3 years later. The move brought us closer to my mother's family, but that wasn't why we left. Until recently, I was under the impression that our relocation had something to do with my parents' work, but that wasn't the case either. It was because of an impromptu phone call from my unpredictable father while he was on vacation. "We're moving here," he said. So we did. Simple as that. He had taken a trip up to Aomori and was enchanted by the place. He adored my mother's hometown and decided that we should live there, but to see what it would be like. Just to see what it would be like. Both my parents had jobs in Tokyo, which they just up and quit. My father was in hospital administration, and my mother was a nurse, so I guess they were confident about finding a job wherever they went. Still, it was a bold, if not reckless, decision. 10 years later, Dad decided it was time to move back to Tokyo, apparently because he'd seen enough of Aomori. For me, it was just a shock. I can laugh about it now, but at the time I was upset. I didn't understand why I had to be uprooted and carted off to someplace I didn't know. I'm sure that my sister, in junior high school at the time, must have felt the same. My parents told us that my father's mother was living alone and getting on in years, and that we needed to move back to look after her. But that's not a huge motivator when you're a kid. I was more concerned about having to leave all my friends. So we lived in Aomori because my father wanted to, and we returned to Tokyo for the same reason. At least now I realize where I get my impulsive tendencies. Common wisdom regarding how one is supposed to live their life never held much sway in the Umehara household. My parents never once sat me down to teach me important life lessons, and they never forced me down any particular path in life. They did tell me not to cause trouble for others, and they mentioned a few things I shouldn't do, but otherwise, they pretty much let me live as I saw fit. So I don't have what you'd call a good sense of what's normal and what's not. What I do know, however, is that if I'd been raised by normal parents in a normal household, I wouldn't have chosen the path that I have. I wouldn't be known today as the best fighting game player in the world. My sister's influence rubs off. I originally got into video games because of my big sister. Being so much older than me, she was my idol and I mimicked everything she did. When she started playing games on a Nintendo Entertainment System, the original 8-bit system, usually called a Nintendo, my eyes lit up with a new desire. The story of my introduction to video games is an all too familiar one. I started when I was 5 with Super Mario Bros. From the moment I first hit that start button, it was a match made in heaven. When I was playing video games, I would lose all track of time, and I never wanted to stop. I was lost in another reality. Of course, my parents didn't let me play as much as I wanted, which naturally made me want to play even more. Luckily, they both worked, so they couldn't be as hawkish as some other parents. When playing games with friends, their stay-at-home mothers would often yell at us to go do something else. I'm sure my mom would have been stricter about the game time if she knew I were home more. The few hours between getting home from school and my parents coming home was my time. They would get back from work at 6 or 7 o'clock at the earliest, so every day I rushed home from school, turned on the Nintendo, and immersed myself in that dazzling 8-bit world. Whenever I heard my mom come home, I would hurry to turn off the power and run to greet her as if I hadn't been playing at all. She saw right through me, of course. Every day she would feel the plug to find it red hot and call me out for playing too much. I in turn would try to convince her that the system gets hot in just a few minutes. Still, she never told me to stop playing games altogether. It was always just not to play so much. It might sound like a small distinction, but it made a world of difference. The new class boss. When we first moved back to Tokyo, one of the reasons I felt so isolated was my Aomori dialect. I sometimes had trouble communicating or just said things differently, and the other kids would tease me about it. Luckily, it never developed into full-blown bullying. I was bigger and stronger than the other kids my age, so no one ever tried to physically intimidate me. It was more like everyone giving me the cold shoulder. I could sense kids watching me, whispering and snickering to themselves. I hated it. I wish they would go ahead and pick a fight so I could settle things, but I was never quite sure who was against me. The relentless pressure was intense. I took the hint and kept mostly to myself. While I don't remember it, my parents say that at one point I told them I wanted to stop going to school, supposedly because it was boring. They were understandably concerned. I was always highly competitive and not the type to complain, but since I wasn't coming home with bruises or broken school stuff, they didn't do anything. Everything changed the day the class bully tried to pick a fight. I had him running away in tears by the end. The reaction of the other boys was predictable. My strength earned their respect. What's more, I could run faster than any of them and never once lost in an arm wrestle. Things like that are a big deal when you're a kid. The teasing stopped, and I even started gathering a following. Before I knew it, I was the new class boss. With my parents off of work, my newfound followers always wanted to come to my house to play after school. Most of the time, it would be 5 or 6 kids, sometimes up to 10. Everyone wanted to go outside to play, but they stuck around when I insisted we stay inside and play video games. Every now and then someone would complain about having to play video games again, but I never had to tell them more than once that it was my house and I was calling the shots. To be fair, we'd eventually go outside since I knew that's what they all really wanted. It went on like that until we entered junior high. Lessons from my father. Early on in life, probably around 2nd grade or so, I felt like something was missing, that I needed to go do something more with my life. I needed a goal to pursue so that I could achieve something great. Not that I had any idea what that goal should be. I could run fast, but had no interest in sports. I was never particularly interested in any one subject in school. I didn't like singing. I wasn't interested in drawing. In spite of my years, such writing felt like a crisis. In my mind, if I didn't find something soon, I'd just get older and older and my options would dwindle into nothingness. I was in such a big hurry to find my niche because of my father. He would always tell me that if there was anything I truly wanted to do, he'd support me, and he'd urge me to find something and pour my all into it. The only problem was, he never told me what that something should be. I was at a loss. After all, I was just a kid with no understanding of how the world worked, so I couldn't decide for myself. I had no idea what my future self would wind up doing. I knew I wanted to do something, and I was confident that I could fully devote myself to it without complaint. If only I could find what that something was. The only thing that I was passionate about was video games, but games? Surely that wouldn't live up to my father's expectations, so I remained frustrated. Time just passed on by. To understand my dad's policy of tolerance for anything his son liked, we first need to step back to my grandfather's generation, a time in which a parent's opinion set the rules. My grandfather was apparently quite the shogi player and an impressive dancer, but of course wasn't permitted to pursue either as a career. My great-grandfather would chide him to stop wasting his time and work harder, and in the end, Grandpa gave up on his dreams. So when my father wanted to devote his time to karate, judo, and kendo as a student and showed a passion for philosophy, my grandfather told him to quit such nonsense and find a real job. History repeated itself when Dad gave it all up and did what my grandfather said. But by following my grandfather's advice, he ended up in a career with no connection to his own interests, a choice he sincerely regretted, so he vowed to never complain about what his son wanted to do. It seems like the more the times change, the less the chances of parents understanding their kids' interests. If I were a parent, no doubt my kids would be into something I didn't approve of. At least, that's how things went in my family, until my dad broke the cycle. Despite having no clue how something like video games could be so appealing, my father never once told me to stop playing them. To him, forcing me to quit video games would be tantamount to inflicting the same pain that he and his father had experienced. He never stopped wondering how things might have turned out if he had stuck with what he liked, and didn't want to burden his son with the same baggage. Even so, he was visibly irritated at times. He never outright told me to quit playing games or to spend more time studying or anything, but he would take a more soft-spoken approach, suggesting that I get out and get some exercise every now and then. I'm sure he was conflicted. From his perspective, it must have seemed a waste I showed such athletic promise he had only played video games. The way my father tells it, my sister was always so obedient and easy to raise, so it wasn't until raising me that he really felt the challenge of raising kids. So here I was, this kid searching for something to do with myself, but unable to find anything other than video games that held my interest. I didn't get any kinds of encouragement from my family or friends, but games were all I had, and giving them up would feel like giving up on life. It was painful. I questioned myself on a daily basis for only having games. The only time I found solace was when I beat someone playing fighting games. I gave my all to gaming, sacrificing my time and my health in pursuit of the win. Memorizing the Preamble. I learned persistence from my sister, but not in the way you might expect. My sister takes to studying like a fish to water, so she always coasted through school. It's a rare gift. When I was in elementary school, I'd always hear about how good her grades in junior high were, and I always assumed that I would be just as good in school once I reached her age. Then came the day when her brilliance smacked me down and made me realize my own mediocrity. The day I tried memorizing the Preamble to the Japanese Constitution. We always had the homework over summer vacation, and that year one assignment was memorizing the Preamble. Now, while I hated studying, I wasn't too bad with memorization. In fact, I'd probably say I was above average. I could do this, but for whatever reason, my parents decided that the whole family would memorize it with me. For better or worse, my sister picked up her copy and started reading. None of us could have dreamed that such a charming family moment would determine my life from there on out. For those not familiar with it, the Preamble to the Japanese Constitution is not exactly short. Coming in at just under 300 words was quite the daunting task and probably a little much to ask of grade schoolers. Indeed, when we returned from vacation, only one other student and I had actually memorized the whole thing. My sister, on the other hand, accomplished this feat after reading it just a few times. I was at a loss for words. There was no way I could compete with that. She was on another level. Dad would always tell me that the path to achieving great things was through hard work. The effort always trumped natural ability. I never once questioned his words, but my sister was different. I remember asking how something like that was possible. He was visibly flustered and brushed me off with an explanation of, well, she's just a quick learner. At any rate, even as a kid, after her performance that day, I knew there was no way I could emulate her. I saw that normal levels of effort were no match for true talent. Still, I believed that my father was right, that effort could trump ability. From this experience, I learned to approach games, studying, everything, as if my life depended on it. No matter how hard it got, I would keep up the fight until my last breath. Even if it wasn't pretty, if I was persistent, then I could take down people like my sister. Maybe the only way for me to win would be back-breaking levels of hard work, but with enough effort I could overwhelm even true talent. This was the essence of what I adapted from my father's teachings. No matter what the contest, I could keep playing until I won, even if it just outlasting everyone else. I refused to lose. On the school playground, if we were saying who could hang from the monkey bars the longest, I refused to let go before anyone else. If we were in the pool and the contest was see who could hold their breath the longest, I would be the last one to come up for air. I might have had an advantage on the monkey bars with my grip, but there were probably 4 or 5 others with stronger lungs than me. It didn't matter though. Losing meant having to lower my head every time I came across talented people like my sister. To me, that was reprehensible. I'd rather die than give up. I approached games with the same fervor. They might have come naturally to some of those I faced along the way, but only a select few can match my persistence. Letting it all go. My friend's situation changed when I reached junior high. Up until that point, the other kids played with me more out of fear than because they actually liked me. Their faces betrayed their true feelings every now and then. I came to rely on this, further keeping me from making any close friends. The fact that I had problems empathizing with others didn't exactly make me popular either. As an example, all the kids who were into sports started out dreaming about becoming a pro baseball player. To be honest, I was something envious of them for having something to focus their efforts on. But in 1993, the J-League was born, bringing pro soccer to Japan. All the kids who at once run around with their bats and gloves were now practicing their dribble and talking about becoming the next J-Leaguer. I didn't get it. They had all just played baseball for 5 or 6 years throughout elementary school, talking about how they wanted to shoot for the pros, but now they all have soccer fever? What happened to baseball? I suppose that's the nature of fads, but that's never been my way. It's not that I hated soccer. I don't. But if I followed suit and abandoned my true love of fighting games just because something else was popular at the time, I might have had fun with it for a while, but I knew I would regret it in the long run. It wasn't even an option. Not that I was exactly brimming with confidence as a gamer. Far from thinking that I could play games my whole life, I thought maybe there was something wrong with me for liking games so much. I knew no other gamers, so I was lonely and miserable. I felt ashamed, like everyone was laughing at me. Today, I have the confidence to wish anyone well if they want to follow their passion, be it baseball or soccer or whatever. But back then, I wasn't confident enough to do the same for myself. It was about the time that I started to feel that fake friendships just weren't worth it, a belief I maintain to this day. I'm happier that way now, but if I'm being honest, leading the life of a lone gamer growing up was a painful experience. The arcade. Feeling increasingly isolated, around the end of my first year in junior high, I started taking the train alone to go to the arcades. None of my schoolmates were willing to go out that far, and most were busy with sports teams and school clubs, so they started hanging out with different crowds and we gradually drifted apart. In elementary school, my size had protected me from bullying, but the kids who stuck with sports got bigger and stronger. By the final year of junior high, the tables were turned in terms of physical strength. From then on, games were basically my life. While I didn't fit in at school, I felt completely at home with the arcade crowd. They didn't care what sports I liked or what I watched on TV or what music I listened to. We were there for our games. A common bond kept everything real. We came to the arcades to escape reality. I heard plenty of stories from people with issues of one kind or another, problems at home or conflict with someone close to them. Some didn't get along with their fathers or were being bullied in school. Very few came from happy families like I did. Unlike at school, where I couldn't trust everyone and friendships felt superficial, I made lifelong friends at the arcade. At the one I frequented the most, there was a guy about 5 years older than me that particularly stood out, even amongst the unusual types that were regulars. He had stained teeth and hair and a beard so overgrown and scruffy that you can barely make out his face. Most people didn't know him would take one look and just edge away. One day, he came over and talked to me, and I realized that he was actually a pretty interesting guy. We quickly became friends and started hanging out more. One day, playing at arcade in Conda, I missed the last train home for the night. The scruffy guy was there too. He lived nearby and came on his bike, so he stuck around for a while, and I figured out what to do. Sheepishly, I called my dad to tell him that I had missed the train. Dad was livid. Here I was, still in junior high, out in an arcade past midnight. I wanted to hang out in an all-night restaurant until the train started running again, but he insisted I get home. Right now. He hung up. I had no money for a taxi. How was I supposed to get back? The scruffy guy rolled up beside me on his beat-up old bicycle, pointed to his luggage rack on the back, and asked, "Need a lift?" He knew my station was about 30 minutes by train, but wasn't fazed. Never being very well-mannered, I was unable to muster up even so much as a thank you. I just nodded, hopped on behind him. During the whole ride, I kept wondering what would inspire him to do this for me. With my added weight, it must have taken more than 3 hours. It was summer, so he was a sweaty mess by the time we arrived at my house. When we finally got there, he just nodded goodbye, started back. As I watched him pedal away into the darkness, I was dumbfounded. It was a first for me. Is this what real friendship was? After that, no matter what anyone said or how they looked at us, we were thick as thieves, as we have been for 15 years now. He's not the only friend from that period that I'm still in contact with either. Arcades are my lifeblood. The friendship they've given me are priceless. Left out again. By the final year of junior high, everyone knew I was so into games that I was taking the train to the big arcades. They never wanted to play games with me because they knew I was too good for it to be any fun. There were still a few kids from school that I hung out with. Like me, they weren't into sports or studying, so we should have just had fun goofing around. I I guess you could say that we were the outcasts. Then came high school entrance exams, which are a very big deal in Japan. In the last year of junior high, many kids go as far as to quitting sports and other school activities to go to cram schools, where they spend hours each day preparing. The rest of my group of misfits were not immune to this pressure. As if someone had flicked a switch, everyone hit the books again. Again, I was left confused. What are they doing? Why couldn't we just keep goofing off? I knew I was being irrational, that this was an inevitability, but I didn't care. I couldn't hold back the flood of my adolescent emotions. Slowly but surely, the others in my group splintered off to form study groups. When the dust had settled, I was once again left alone and frustrated. I made a vow. I wasn't going to waste even 1 minute of my time on anything but gaming. I had shunned sports and clubs to play games instead. I would devote the same energy and passion, no, even more, to games as the others did to sports or studying. Anything less, and I'd just be some scrub. My insecurities were snowballing with tremendous momentum. Still, the experience left me with an uneasiness about pouring myself into games that I never quite shook completely. Teachers and other adults kept telling me that I needed to study or that I should try sports, but I couldn't. If I were capable of changing just because someone told me to, I wouldn't have been in this situation in the first place. So instead, I put up a defiant front of strength in support of the only thing I valued: gaming. I was going to work so hard that anyone, anywhere would have to recognize my efforts. If I didn't, who knows what kind of person I'd turn out to be. It gave me shivers just thinking about it. I never had a very good self-image. There were plenty of times when I was alone that I worry about myself, while my passion had to be for gaming. I doubt myself. Was I doing the right thing? I was of two minds, always arguing back and forth with myself. Stubbornly, I always conclude that all I could do was keep on gaming. Looking back, I can admit that between sports, studying, and gaming, no one is better than the others. They're just different. But back in junior high, it was a big source of insecurity. Behind all the false bravado, I wasn't fully confident that the path I had chosen was the correct one. Climbing onto the world stage. Bullheadedly pushing forward, I became stronger and stronger as a gamer. I put an unbelievable amount of time grinding at the arcades to practice. My competition played for 10 hours, I played for 30. They put in 100 hours, I do 300. As my playing time increased, I honed my strategies and my abilities to analyze the game and players. I even tried my hand at writing a strategy book, the clumsy draft of which lies sleeping in a drawer somewhere. Even so, I was never once under any impression that I had a gift for gaming. I'm a pretty slow learner, and that's as much of a handicap in gaming as it is in school. Everything I've achieved is a result of old-fashioned hard work. When I first started getting serious about being a gamer around the age of 10, I couldn't beat anyone. It took me a while to learn the ropes, but every day I got a little bit better. By the time I was 12, I would win some and lose some. Eventually, I could best everyone but the strongest players at the arcade. By 13, I would take a few beatings at the more crowded, high-level arcades, but I wouldn't drop a single game at the less popular ones. By 14, I felt I was unrivaled. This coincided with the new release in the series that I've been playing, Darkstalkers 3. A new series release means more than just updated graphics or different character costumes. Sequels can have new rules or introduce entirely new systems, so everyone was starting off more or less fresh. Experience and knowledge of previous games in the series helps to some extent, but you're still learning the new rules from scratch. Being strong in the previous game means less than learning the new one, so without putting in the required work, last year's champion can become this year's scrub. This is one of the roughest things about the gaming world, as well as the most exciting. This was the first game in which I would become the Japanese champion. Having put in more hours than all the other players out there, being the best felt like an obvious outcome. So when I was handed the trophy, it didn't excite me whatsoever. Crowned the best. In 1998, I was invited to the Street Fighter Alpha 3 World Championship in San Francisco, where I faced the American champion, Alex Valle. Looking back, that tournament was a big turning point for me. I was in high school at the time and had to take a few days off to fly to the US for a Sunday match on November 8th. It was my first time out of the country, so I had to get a passport for the event. With the event organizer covering all my travel and hotel expenses, I wasn't worried about the cost, but I do remember the 4-day schedule being a real slog. The venue was an arcade in the strip mall. It reminded me of the open-air shopping districts we have back in Japan, with the supermarket, restaurant, and clothing shops all on the same block. The arcade had everything arranged especially for the event. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't all that excited about the match. I didn't know the level of the competition in the US, but I assumed Japanese players were stronger. I had every confidence that Japan, and Tokyo in particular, was the strongest, most competitive fighting game arena in the world. Our arcades were always packed, and we played for more hours each day. I knew the US was a big place, but American players better than the Japanese players? No way. The day's program started with a national tournament to decide the American champion for what was the most popular fighting game at the time. The tournament format dictated 3 rounds for each game. The first to win 2 games took the round. This differed from the standard Japanese format of 2 rounds to a match, which made for shorter matches. Once the US champion was crowned, they would face the Japanese champion, namely me. Watching the matches, I thought there was no way that I was going to lose. The only standout was Alex, who had a respectable technique and a good feel for the game that led to his taking the US championship. When we met in the World Championship, the match was closer than I ever could have expected. I had underestimated my competition. In the first game, I took the first round with little effort, but then Alex fired back to take the 3 consecutive rounds and an early 1-game lead. Not only had I given up the lead, but I was getting trashed in lopsided, decisive losses in Alex's favor. In the second game, Alex was emboldened by his lead and took the first 2 rounds. Just like that, I was a mere round away from going home a loser. I took a deep breath to regroup. I felt the pressure melt away and my senses heighten as I regained my focus. Things were getting interesting. I was now ready to let the game come to me instead of playing his game. From that point on, I roared back to 3 straight rounds, bringing us an even and a game apiece. I maintained my composure in the 3rd and final game, winning the match with a game count of 3-1. In the end, I still wasn't playing at the top of my game. I dropped a bunch of combos and met many surprises. Nonetheless, I avoided defeat. It was close, but the win saved me from embarrassment. Like me, the Japanese player base took it as a given that I would win. The Japanese champion losing to an American champion, and straight losses no less, could have been a huge loss of face. More than that, however, given my confidence going into the tournament would have broken my spirit. I might never have gotten over losing to my own cockiness. If I'd lost that match, I don't know where I'd be today. It certainly wouldn't have been pretty. How I did it. In August of 2010, I was recognized by Guinness World Records as the most successful player in major tournaments of Street Fighter. How was I able to immerse myself in gaming to the levels it took to be the best in the world? Where did my energy come from when I played? By never giving up. People constantly told me that I was just wasting time because after all, they're just games. There was no such thing as a pro gamer at the time, but I put as much effort into gaming as any pro baseball or soccer player did in their sports. More than anything, persistence has fueled my confidence. As I've said, I was never sure I was doing the right thing by devoting my life to gaming, and being better than others at games was meaningless to me. I only found confidence in the way I approached things and the fruits of consistently aiming for the top. I had my weaknesses, of course. I fumbled with words when meeting new people, and I hated studying. Compared to the athletes in my school, I was slower and weaker. Even so, I eventually overcame my feelings of intimidation and humiliation. Confronting and overcoming my weaknesses gave me confidence and made me a decent person. As someone who was only shining in a virtual world of fighting games, the only thing that kept me connected to the real world and allowed me to engage with people on equal terms was my confidence in my own hard work and my approach to life. My greatest strength is my willingness to take up a challenge when there's something that I want and work hard at it and see it through to the end. I address my weaknesses head on and boldly choose the path less taken. It is precisely this attitude that allows me to be happy with myself now. Standing up to challenge may mean little to those who have never really struggled in life, but someone like me who has many demons from my childhood, the will to challenge adversity is invaluable. My vow to myself is to always put in a level of effort that I can take pride in. This is what sets me apart from those that give up. It is what has always allowed me to devote myself entirely to gaming and join the ranks of the elite. For me, this was a really cool chapter, I think, because I guess when you see somebody like Daigo play, you kind of just assume that he's a guy with just a ton of natural talent, right? Like, he just plays really like instinctually. He just makes such good moves that you wouldn't expect him to be somebody that doesn't consider himself naturally gifted or like he was born with it. It's very clear that his stance when it comes to that debate is that hard work trumps everything. If you want it bad enough and you're determined enough, you can get anywhere. And I respect that with the utmost of my being. I think that sometimes natural ability can absolutely be a curse. If you're naturally gifted at something, then you don't really think too hard about it. Like, the wins kind of come a lot easier to you, and they don't mean as much because there wasn't a lot of hard work involved with getting them. And I feel like when you come into a situation that's legitimately challenging, you're going to be at a complete loss about what to do. It's going to be overwhelming for you because challenge isn't something you've ever faced. And when life hits you with something that's a real life challenge, something that is legitimately difficult to handle, you have to have something like experience or previous exposure to something like that in order to be able to work past it. And I think that Daigo's words here are kind of a sort of like beacon or a guideline to that. In order to be the person that considers himself successful or somebody worth looking up to, or somebody just that has a sort of inner strength to him. I think that's the biggest thing. Not necessarily like physical strength, mental strength, or anything like that. I guess it's just something deeper, like something inside of you. I think there's something to that. I think that when we hear strength, we have a tendency to think about it on a shallow level, I guess, or something like, oh, he can lift more weights, or like this person over here, he can run way faster. Like, we kind of get caught up on like the very surface level of what it means to be a strong person. And even just from this first chapter, I'm getting a lot of sense from Daigo's words and the things that he's saying is that he has a true grasp on what real strength is. And it's not the person that can lift the most weights. It's not the person that runs the fastest. It's not the person that's most naturally gifted. It's the person that's persistent, the person that's been beaten to hell, but despite everything that they've gone through, they keep standing back up and they learn from it. And I think learning from it is a big thing too, because just because you get beaten down doesn't automatically mean that you're going to come back a stronger person, right? Getting beaten down can be a lesson if you make it a lesson. If you run into a situation where you've lost or like it feels insurmountable, then learning, teaching, truly taking a look at what happened to you, why you lost, and how things ended up that way, I think is the biggest thing you can do for yourself to make sure that that doesn't happen again, or at least if it does happen again, you can take pride in the fact that, okay, I truly took a look at what was going on and I'm a better person for it. So I'm really, really looking forward to continuing this book with you guys and just seeing more of what Daigo has to say, because this guy is Ryu, basically. I have a lot of respect for his philosophy and just the things he has to say, and this book is hitting me in a really strong place. So looking forward to chapter 2 with you guys, and stay tuned.